I voted no in 2014 because I genuinely felt that it was the safest option for Scotland at that point.
I was confident that when I voted no, I voted the right way, but then the doubts started to creep in.
It was like my heart said yes for independence, but my head said no.
They told us that if we voted to leave, then Scotland would no longer be part of the European community.
Who's they? Yet again, this lie has been repeated. Yet again, more and more people adopt this lie as their own. The fabricated version of events, of course, will have you believe that they, being the people that campaigned for Scotland to remain part of the UK, they and they alone made this promise, and now it's been broken. But let's not forget the European Union themselves came out and said the same thing. The SNP themselves eventually came out and said the same thing, after, of course, trying their damnedest to lie for a year solid and proclaim that an independent Scotland would inherit EU membership. Eventually they were found out to be lying through their teeth, so they released a white paper, and the white paper acknowledges the fact that we would have been out of the EU with the intention of trying to rejoin it, but that's the point. We would have been out of the EU, no guarantee of getting back in, and I can't help but feel that that was the reason the referendum didn't go the way that it was meant to go. When you take into consideration how things have played out since, the deliberate blurring of the lines, the deliberate conflation between IndyRef 1 and the potential of the outcome of IndyRef 2. The original referendum would have meant being out of the EU. This time round, it's about leaving the UK to rejoin the EU, to try and sweeten the deal, the rewritten history, by making out that the only reason IndyRef 1 was lost was because more people who wanted independence felt that the only way they could protect their EU membership was to vote to remain part of the UK. Now that promise has been broken. The only sensible, logical vote would be to now gain our independence from the UK to happily rejoin the non-existent happy family in the EU.
I did feel betrayed in the IndyRef when the results came out and the promises were very quickly withdrawn.
Oh, the promises, yes, the promises. Nicola Sturgeon really has worked a doozy on so many, but yet I don't even think this is a case of having a short memory. You people are just lying. Completely and utterly lying. In the 2014 referendum, every politician that came on screen and every pro and con from both opposing parties or campaigns even, it was all news to me. Didn't know any of them, didn't know any of those things. And after the referendum result came and went, I remember quite clearly two major points of contention. There was the debate about the currency, and a lot of people thought it was rigged. Never once did I hear, at any point, that the reason the referendum result went the way that it did was because more people felt the only way to protect their place in the EU was to vote to remain. The first time I heard that being used as justification for why the referendum result went the way that it did was last year, at 23 years old. Funny that. So at the age of 16, never once did I hear that being brought up, and as my adolescent years died out, never heard it. Not till 23. I didn't even hear it come David Cameron's election the year after 2014, when he ran with the manifesto to hold an EU referendum if he was re-elected. Where was Nicola Sturgeon's outrage there? Where was Nicola Sturgeon claiming that promises were broken? None of this occurred because it was a load of shit.
What about the rest of the UK? What about the possibility of an in-out referendum in the UK? Could that not completely muddy the waters if your negotiations actually don't keep to the timetable that you set out?
Well, I believe our timetable is realistic, and as I've already said, others have expressed that view as well. I hope and I expect that by the time the UK has a in-out referendum, if that does happen, then Scotland by that time will have become an independent country. But I think the position of the UK government and David Cameron in particular does really underline the fact that the risk, the threat to Scotland's continuing membership of the European Union doesn't come from the prospect of Scottish independence. It comes from a growing Euroscepticism within the UK government, and that possibility of an in-out referendum. I believe that would be the wrong road for Scotland to go down, but that would be the risk for Scotland if it opted to stay within the United Kingdom.
So how can it be, several years later, that people peddle this line, that we were told explicitly the only way to guarantee EU membership was to vote Remain, but yet back then, a year prior to the 2014 referendum, we have Nicola Thinlips, with an even worse haircut than she has now, explicitly saying that there was concerns in regards to the UK's position on EU membership, acknowledging that there was the potential of this occurring. It makes it very difficult to buy into the notion that people genuinely believed that they were voting to remain in the UK to save their EU membership, when this was common knowledge at the time. Really, anybody that voted to stay in the UK in order to stay part of the EU would have known that this was a possibility.
2014, had Scotland won independence, we would have been out of the EU immediately with no guarantees of getting back in. So what you're saying now isn't the same as what you would have said in 2014.
Madam, forgive me, your question's based on a false premise.
It's not though, is it, Alan?
Had we voted for independence in 2014, we would have entered into negotiations.
Would have potentially entered into negotiations. There was no guarantee of Scotland getting back in.
In parallel with London and with the European Union.
Yeah.
Now, that was that.
But the point makes no sense. If this was the SNP's intention, if Mr. Lead the Light On was being sincere in what he said there, then it would make absolutely no sense for people to vote to remain in the UK because it was the only way to stay in the EU when the SNP's intention was to immediately rejoin the EU anyway, according to them. This is the can of worms that they have unintentionally opened up for themselves to a degree, because whenever you point the finger at them and say to them that in the event of our independence result in 2014, it would have meant having to leave the EU, this is the sort of answer that they will throw at you, which completely debunks the claims being made about the referendum result went the way that it did.
A light bulb moment for me when I changed my mind on independence from no to yes.
In my friendship group, there were quite a few of us who voted no, and we've all moved over to the yes side.
What, because you were all promised? And now you're being dogged out against your will, eh?
I think you only have to look at what's happened since Brexit to see that Scotland's voice has been ignored.
Is that so? If you voted to leave the European Union and you live in Scotland, aye, your voice has been ignored in Scotland anyway. It's as if these people don't exist. Scotland's been dragged out against as well. But technically they're not, because it was a UK-wide referendum. And the only people that choose to see that differently are the SNP, because of what Nicola Sturgeon explicitly said prior to that referendum, inciting independent supporters to vote to remain by basically threatening them that they would never see a referendum anytime soon if they didn't. So naturally, independence voters voted accordingly. She took about 62%, she ran with it to try and say that Scotland wants to remain part of the EU. And along the way, she's blurred the lines between the original referendum, the original movement, and what we now see today, with BS like this, branding themselves as the party to beat the SNP come 2021, by basically implying that they're the party of the Unionists, and they're going to offer the Scottish people a different future, one that, of course, involves trying to sell the public the benefits of the Union. It's not going to work. Like, if the elections results to date have proved anything at all, it's that there is, at the very least, a slim majority that want independence. That does not indicate support for Europe. Now, if this was an ideal world where these people were not all in on the same thing, the best way to derail a portion of the SNP's narrative to date would be to put that case forward. But instead of that, Jackson Carlo's made a bit of a habit of running around the place, throwing accusations about the SNP are obsessed with independence. That, combined with the accusations that they get from time to time that they're a bunch of nationalists, they relish in that stuff. because that's the sort of thing that the electorate hear. That's the sort of thing that the electorate buy into. And it's really concerning that so many people are just willfully allowing these people to pull the wool over their eyes. And this is also the SNP inevitably win again. And the same thing will probably occur again, where they won't get a referendum. But blame will be redirected elsewhere. But in the meantime, Nicola Sturgeon will be able to continue doing what she's been doing to date. Painting a great picture on her podiums, pretending she knows what she's talking about when she's not reading UN instructed scripts. But behind the scenes, she's shafting this country, pissing her money away, and intends to de-industrialise Scotland, all in the name of non-existent man-made climate change. And we've got this to look forward to at the end of this year, combined with the fact that Nicola Sturgeon is on record previously saying that she's obsessed with preventing the SNP's collapse, saying she's obsessed with keeping the SNP in power, aka she intends to stay in power any means necessary so she can continue implementing all the policies that are required of her like a good little puppet. And the best way to achieve another election win is to yet again bullshit the electorate about independence.